Hello everyone, it's Ned. Welcome back. We're going to finish the last half of the legions, the last 9 of the Siege of Cthonia Inductii legions. Going to take a look at the whole thing put together, have some last thoughts on it. Are you ready? I'm definitely ready. Before we get into a discussion about the last 9, there is something that I must address about the last episode. Now, shortly after I posted the video, I became aware of something that might have been a discrepancy, and then it was hit by a couple of listeners, Sunburned Halo, and then Jason Mullins on YouTube. Shout out for you two folks as well. And that deals with the Night Lords. So this is, again, one of those things that's really, why it's going to be really important to look at these rules and realize that they are something different from what we've seen so far. The Inductii template, the Inductii concept, is going to be a set of rules that stacks on top of an existing rule set. And so there's going to be some more complications in these rules than you might think of otherwise. This is the second time I've been fooled. Once was when I was looking at the Space Wolves, and now with the Night Lords. So I went on and talked about the Killer's Blades and the things you could do with the special gang up rule, where you have a chance to hit more than one model in a challenge. However, part of that analysis talked about and dealt with the idea of giving power access to a couple of Legionnaires who were going to use in those challenges, but strictly speaking, that's not something that's allowed. So in this specific despoiler entry, the data entry says that a character will exchange their chainsword for X equipment upgrade. Now, strictly speaking, the Night Lords are unable to do any of that then here with their Inductii squad because they don't have chainswords. They have to swap those chainswords out for Killer's Blades. And so, lacking the prerequisite to exchange for something else, it means that unless there's an errata, an FAQ, or something else, then the Night Lords players will not be able to adjust the war gear hardly at all on this unit. Now, it's worth pointing out that the Sergeant can, in fact, as was noted by our dear friend Jason Mullins, the Sergeant has a special caveat in his rules where he can exchange either the bolt pistol or the chainsword for his upgrade. So you can keep the murder blades, but also then take a power weapon if you wish. But you do give up the bolt pistol. Not that big of a deal. So there is that upgrade that this squad can take, but again, unless GW decides to make a statement or correct that or say that it was a mistake, that's going to be the way the thing stands. That is going to change my interpretation of this squad. It's a little bit less, it has a little bit less options, but if anything, I think it makes the lore more interesting. There is a story, for example, in the Night Haunters Primarch book where there is a squad of basically degenerates like these Inductii would be who show up, and the Night Haunter kills them all because he just knows they're terrible people. He kills his own sons. And so I could totally see, and I think it's appropriate, I mean, here's a squad of this total filth. They show up in the armory. They're like, well, we've got these pig stickers and whatever else. We need some better weapons. And they're like, no, you're gutter trash. That'll be just fine for you. We really just want you to run in front. What are we going to do? Let you steal our glory? So, narratively, I think it still is fantastic. But it does change the way that the rules would actually be impacting the game. Without any further ado, then, let's get right into the other Inductii squads and talk about the last 9. So the first up is the World Eaters, and the World Eaters are going to have a rule that specifically targets despoiler squads. It is going to change nothing as far as equipment or unit modifications, but it is going to have a rule substitution. The Heart of the Legion rule is going to be gone. Notably, that means this squad gets to keep Spite of the Legion, which is good. And you instead get the Ravening Madman special rule, which is a rule that we all already know, especially if you're a World Eaters player, because you've seen it in the core book. So the Ravening Madman rule it did show up in the core book at first, and it was attached to something that you could do to your characters. So in the original book, there's the World Eaters Berserkers rule, and it says any model with both the independent character and Legionis Astartes World Eaters rule that does not also have the Psyker subtype can be upgraded to a Berserker for 20 points and gains the Ravening Madman special rule and increases their attack characteristics by 1. So they get a +1 to attack, and then they gain this rule. And the Ravening Madman says, any model taking a 2-wound roll in the assault phase against a unit composed entirely of models with this special rule reduces its strength by 1 when determining the score required to wound. And this doesn't affect the attacking unit's strength for purposes of inflicting instant death. So that's important. Additionally, any 2 hit rolls made in the assault phase targeting that unit that includes one or more models with this rule always counts the majority weapon skill of the target unit as 3, regardless of the actual weapon skill of the models in that unit. Also, very specifically, not that it's going to matter here because of the other Inductii exclusions, but a unit that includes models with this special rule may only be joined by models with this special rule or the Primarch Angron, and models with this special rule may not join a unit that includes any models without this special rule. Okay, so you used to be able to, you are able to put this onto a character. The other place that it showed up in the rules is, as noted, Angron can join a squad with this. And then the other example is just the Red Butchers, which are the Terminator squads that are theoretically in the story the bodyguards of Angron, but, they're in Cataphracti, and Angron ain't slowing down for anybody. So regardless, there was one unit that you could put this with. And so if you were a World Eaters player and you wanted to use this rule, there was basically only one thing you could do with this. This is for basically a character that you want to be escorted by Red Butchers, which is fine, which is fun. The Red Butchers models are really cool. I would totally consider doing something like this. Now, in particular, the rule about the -1 strength, especially if you've read the Siege of Terra books, you see that the late stage heresy World Eaters really represent this rule. Of total lunacy, more easy to hit, but not necessarily easy to put down. And so I really like the fact that this rule exists for these models. And if you wanted to theme out a list that is going for this target, then, including a few squads of these Inductii, that would definitely make sense. It would be a great way to represent that phase of the war on the tabletop. Now, is it any good? Is it bad? Well, it's sort of a mixed bag. So one of the things that's interesting about despoiler squads in general is the fact that their big weakness, as has been talked about before, as I've talked about before, is that what are they going to go up against, right? So with weapon skill 4, they are going to be effective at slapping other weapon skill 4 units. One of the things that's a bit of a trade-off, let's say this squad does go up against a weapon skill 4 unit. If they're counted at weapon skill 3, then your opponent is having an easier time generating more hits against you, but it's not affecting the way you hit them negatively either. Okay, I had to go back and reread that rule to make sure I was correct about that, because suddenly I had a panic. But nope, it specifically says, the Ravening Madman says, any hit rolls made in the assault phase targeting a unit counts the weapon skill as lower, so it has no effect on their own swings, but that's good. Okay, so the point is that it's going to make it easier for your opponents to hit you. However, you're going to reduce the strength of the strike against you by 1 as well. So let's say, for example, we have a despoiler squad against another despoiler squad. So they're going to hit you on 3s. However, they're only going to wound you on 5s. So it does trade off a little bit. And depending on the weapons that are coming at you, it may or may not be an acceptable substitute right away. One thing that's interesting, though, is that it provides basically only benefit if you were going to have to throw this Inductii squad against something with weapon skill 5. They were already going to be hitting you on 3s, so changing your weapon skill does not mechanically affect that in any way, shape, or form, but the reduction of the strength of the attack does in fact help you in some specific situations. Now, because the rule has that caveat that says it's not going to affect instant death, don't think that we found a sneaky way to get away from like Power Fist and whatever else, because we haven't. But there's definitely some possibilities here in weathering the storm, especially when you're considering and thinking about the fact that, like, you can bulk this squad up. This can be a huge squad. They're still World Eaters, so you can still be giving them chain axes. You're still getting an additional charge bonus of one attack. This is still a World Eaters unit. It just has this slight little change. And like I said, it feels fluffy. It feels thematic to me. And for that reason, I'm putting them in the worth considering part of the thing. I don't necessarily think that this is a rough thing to lose. You're losing some survivability with the Heart of the Legion, but I think it's definitely worth considering. The one thing, of course, being that it's support squad or whatever, but mixing a few of these in as big squads, I think it'd be a lot of fun no matter what. All right, so next up we have the Ultramarines, and this is one that, maybe I'm glad a little bit that I had a week in between recording these sessions to think about it, because at first I was not very impressed by this. And I was thinking, this isn't super exciting or fun. And I was leaning more towards the way I went with the Imperial Fists rule. I also got some feedback, not on the video specifically, that Imperial Fist players thought I was too kind by saying that it was a B tier, that it should have been worse. Maybe. I guess I can see that. But regardless, the Ultramarines rule is definitely better in that regard. It's definitely more fun. So part of the lore behind this, which is one of the reasons that makes me really like it, is that this Inductii squad speaks to kind of what happens to the Ultramarines as a legion after Calth. And, you see the seeds of it starting actually during Calth with, Aenid Thiel and a couple of other characters who are beginning to realize that they need to be much more responsive and adaptive to this new kind of war, because it wasn't the kind of war that they thought they would be fighting ever. So with those changes and with the fact that they've got to, recruit a massive number of Marines to make up for their losses in the, Shadow Crusade and Calth specifically, the Ultramarines Inductii template specifically modifies a couple of things. One thing that's interesting is that these are 10-man squads. That cannot be modified. They cannot take additional Legionnaires. For war gear, there's also a variety, and this is where the most interesting thing probably comes into play. For every 5 models in this unit, you can take one of those Legionnaires can take a bolter and exchange that bolter for a special weapon, specifically a flamer for 5 points, a plasma gun for 10 points, or a melta-gun for 15 points. Now, the one thing that's really interesting here is that the Ultramarines then, they keep Heart of the Legion, but they lose Fury of the Legion and replace Fury of the Legion with the Inexorable special rule. So Inexorable is the rule that it changes the way that you take leadership tests, and outside of Fear, your tests are not modified. So this means that this is a squad with Fury and Inexorable. Those are 2 nice defensive rules. They're going to help a little bit, although the Stubborn and the Inexorable, there's a little bit of overlap there. Whatever. So at first, I simply thought, okay, this is a very boring thing. You can take 2 guns. What's the big deal? But essentially, when you're taking a look at this and you're realizing that you've lost Fury of the Legion, essentially, the way I see this squad working is you have a 10-man squad with 2 melta-guns on the inside and a melta-gun on top of the Rhino that's carting them around. And you have 7 other bodies in the squad, which are ablative wounds for you to shoot things with those melta-guns. When you put it like that, it's not very exciting or whatever, but it's exactly the kind of tactical intelligence that a fluffy Ultramarines player might choose to use. You know what's really, really effective when you're in late war situations and you need to use your resources entirely? Make sure that you have infantry squads that can quickly get in and try to take a high reward weapon like a melta-gun and put it right into the flank of an armored vehicle. Or heck, 2 melta-guns in a squad that's going to be charged. If I were someone with a Terminator squad and I had to charge into a unit that has 2 melta-guns, I would really consider about if I'm really wanting to eat that Overwatch. The effectiveness of a unit like this it's a lot of different things. So I am imagining that I'm putting it into a Rhino. It can't have more than 10 in the squad. So if you're hoofing it, you are only 10 models and you're going to take a lot of casualties. Regardless, this squad can move on to the wings. It can try to contest vehicle-held objectives or vehicle-held portions of the board. It can do a lot of different things. The biggest thing for, I would imagine an Ultramarines player is here's another little tool, and it can do a lot of different things. It's got, multiple weapons, which are very dangerous and do need to be addressed, and they're right there for the using. So I really like this one, and I think that Ultramarines players will definitely consider it and use it. It's definitely useful, and it's definitely fun. Okay, the next up is the Death Guard, and the Death Guard Legion Inductii template is, well, it's not required to be a small unit, but there are definitely rules that are going to make you want to think about keeping it as a small unit. So similar to the other, it is a tactical squad upgrade for every 5 models in the unit, as opposed to the multitude of options by the Ultramarines. The Death Guard get 1 option. A Legionary can exchange their bolter for an all-chem flamer for 5 points. And if you're not a Death Guard player, or if you're, just forgotten this rule, the all-chem flamer is just a flamer but it has the Fleshbane special rule, and it also has Get Hot, so it's much more effective against infantry, but there is a chance for you hurting yourself. So essentially, for the same price as a Flamer in another squad, you get this upgraded Flamer, which is great, which is perfect. Now, admittedly, exchanging one Flamer for the other type is, I mean, that's standard for the Legion, and I guess you are required to take the all-chem Flamer specifically in this situation, but, you know, whatever, there you have it. So you've got a squad that can have 2 Flamers. Okay, what now? So they have a very interesting rule called Barbaran? It's Barbarous, so I'm going to say Barbaran Resilience. And it replaces the Heart of the Legion special rule. And it's sort of a feel no pain of some kind, but modified. So when a model with this special rule suffers an unsaved wound, it can make a special Barbaran Resilience in order to avoid the wound. It may not be made against wounds that have special death, or instant death, I'm sorry. So same sort of limitation as feel no pain. You roll a d6 each time an unsaved wound is suffered. Here's the caveat. If a unit with this special rule includes 10 or more models at the start of a given phase, this rule has no effect. If a unit with this special rule includes less than 10 models at the start of a given phase, then on a roll of 6+, the unsaved wound is discounted. If a unit with this special rule includes less than 5 models, then on a roll of 5+, the unsaved wound is discounted. Treat discounted wounds as having been saved. On any other result, the wound is taken as normal. This is a damage mitigation roll. Any model may take only a single damage mitigation roll of any new type for any given wound. So this is definitely going to land it into the worth considering or B tier, as you've seen on the screen here. And I mean, like, it's an interesting rule. It definitely is cool how it gets stronger as more of the unit dies off. It's definitely, I think, useful to consider that. Like, let's say, one of the things that I keep thinking about with several of these units is that they're all priced roughly at about 100 and some points. Like, no more than 120 points, unless you really start to stack on upgrades. You can't give them Artificer armor. You have some limitations on some other things. But, like, if you take this squad as its base, let's say if you have, like, an sort of an odd number of points laying around at the end of your list, you can add this extra scoring option into your list, and it is designed to kind of be independent because it does have that damage mitigation that it comes from being shot at or whatever else. Now, one of the things that's interesting to me is that, and it's important to note that because this triggers at the start of the phase, the first time you get shot, if you get shot and you lose like all 10 models, or if you lose 9 models or whatever else, it's not like this is going to pop in to effect at some point. So like this squad can still be wiped from full strength to nothing without ever triggering its special rule. Because of the stipulation on 9 models or less is when the thing actually starts to kick in. And let's be honest, a 6+ Feel No Pain is not like super great and not something that on its own you're going to write, a star review of a unit for. But the under 5 thing is really where you start seeing that you're going to have a chance to try to make back some saves. So because of that, because of the sort of anti-synergy with beefing this unit out, I really see this as a unit that, like, if you want to add 2 Flamers, again, into a Rhino, you want to try to jump on an objective or take a flank, cause a little bit of minimal distraction, and then you don't want to have to try, the Barbaran Resilience provides a little bit of survival or staying power in a way that you don't have to pay for to continue to add. So I think that's fine. Is it worth considering? Absolutely. Especially if you just want to get more Flamers, more of those sweet All-Chem Flamers onto the board. But, if you chose not to, or if you don't have room for it in your list, I don't think you're necessarily going to be, like, feeling a huge penalty from it. Okay, the next one is the Thousand Suns, and you know what? I'm going to be honest. This is the first one that just makes me go, but why? I don't get this one. Now, I'm no hack. Well, okay, that's not true. I'm a bit of a hack, but I am also not going to just dismiss something out of hand without really trying to think about it. As a matter of fact, I feel like most of the time when I run across something that I really don't understand, when I really don't understand something, I will sit there and think, okay, what am I missing? There's a blind spot. There's something I don't get, some connection that I'm not making. And well, I reached out to a couple of people that have been playing Thousand Suns, and I asked them just little things. So first of all, let's talk about what this rule says, and then we'll talk about my problems with trying to apply it or think about it. So this is specifically a rule for targeting tactical squads. It does not modify characteristics, unit composition. There is a specific war gear limitation, but there is not an added war gear. The Inductii for the Thousand Suns cannot take Asphyx bolt shells or for their bolt pistols or their bolters. In addition, they replace Fury of the Legion with a special unattuned practitioner's rule. So a model with this special rule gains the etheric guidance psychic power and may not select a minor arcana from those presented by the Prosperine Arcana special rule. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Thousand Suns have a variety of arcana that they might select from in order to get special powers or be, basically different things that they can do. This squad has that thing selected for it. And that rule is Etheric Guidance, and it says that when a unit that includes a Psyker with this power makes a shooting attack, the controlling player may make a Psychic check for the Psyker before any hit rolls are made. If the Psychic check is successful, then until the shooting attack is resolved, attacks made by this unit have the Breaching 6+ special rule. If the Psychic check is failed, then the unit suffers perils of the warp and receives 1 additional wound when it does so. So this makes sense because the concept here about these Inductii is that they're being forced into, like everybody else, the transitions being forced. And the Thousand Suns, of course, are really susceptible to that flesh change problem where the magic in them causes the gene seed to rupture, whatever. They become warp spawn and monstrosities and all that stuff. Thanks, Zinch, much love. So I like the fact that the backlash on this rule is something that represents that. That's like the best thing I have to say about this unit. So let's take a look at the squad that we are replacing. Now, another thing I'm going to remind myself of, and everybody else, is that the Inductii squads are not necessarily meant to be better than the units that they replace. As a matter of fact, they are sort of meant to represent, that degraded process. And so I think, well, in a lot of the book, there have been rules that have represented that degradation that has come along, and I think they've done a really good job of it. But the problem with the Inductii squad is just how much you lose and what you are getting back, and how those things don't necessarily connect as much as you want them to. So first of all, the benefit that you're getting for this psychic power is a 6+ breaching if you pass. Now, part of the reason why there is that stipulation that you don't get the access to the special shells is because that would be probably a little bit too broken for what they're trying to get you to do. So the special bolters, they all have shortened range. The Asphyx bolter shell is an 18-inch range as opposed to 24, and the bolt pistol is an 8-inch range instead of a 12. So there's already a nerf basically in this. The benefit is that these bolters gain shred. So you do get to reroll fails to wound, which is great. So I guess the thought of 6+ breaching with shred is just too much for this, and I guess I can see that would be kind of strong, but again, well, let's talk about what else there is in here. So the Prosperine Arcana has 5 subtypes that you can choose from, and these are basically just small psychic powers that just your regular sergeants or whoever can cast upon your squads. So when we're talking about tactical squads, I think the idea and what's cool about this is that you theoretically could use, multiple powers on different units so that every unit has their own sort of idea and fluff, the idea of where they came from. It builds more character in your list, and it also gives you different abilities to try to cast as you're going through your game. So I'm not gonna do a deep dive into this because, for one, I'm not necessarily super expert on it, but also because it's just out of the interest of time. So I'm just going to talk about 2 that I think, and I also got confirmation from some other people, are the kind of powers that you might consider putting onto a tactical squad. So the first one is the Pavani, and that is a psychic power that allows you to take a unit that is selected for a move or a run, and then you make a psychic check, and if you are successful, then all models in the unit gain a +3 to the distance moved, and then also ignore any difficulties to their movement for difficult terrain, which is huge. So like a standard squad of Marines, movement 7, add a +3, run another 4 for your initiative, ignore difficult terrain, and so now you're scooting along 14 inches. This is really fantastic, especially for a squad like a tactical squad, which you're probably hoping to use to take ground, take objectives, or something else. Another thing that you would consider maybe is the Corvidae. The Corvidae special rule is a sort of unique offensive buff. If you successfully check, then the first wound scored on a target unit by the unit that, successfully used the Corvidae power, they get to allot or allocate that shooting wound. So, I mean, this, when you're just throwing bolters, it's not necessarily something that, like, you always would necessarily want to do, but let's say, like, you have a sergeant with a combi weapon or something, a combi melta, for example, and then you get to choose where this thing goes, and you're like, well, I'm going to put my combi melta shot on the enemy sergeant or on the champion who's standing in the squad or something like that. So I could see using something like that as well. The other ones are interesting as well, but not necessarily specifically keyed towards what the tactical Marines want to do. So Raptora is going to give you an invulnerable save, which might be pretty good. I mean, you might use that to keep a large squad of tactical Marines alive. Maybe. Pyre gives Hammer of Wrath, which, if you're going to charge with a tactical squad, honestly, Hammer of Wrath on a tactical squad nearly triples their offensive possibility. So it's not necessarily a terrible, thing either. And then Athenian is one that manipulates leadership in a shooting attack. This speaks to me more like Recon Marines or something with long-range shooting, or something that has a pinning check on it, because there really isn't anything with pinning. There isn't anything, I think, pinning that a tactical squad can do off the top of my head. So basically, I mean, it's Pavoni or Corvidae, or potentially, I don't know. I mean, I could see Raptora, I could see Pyre. The point is that you have multiple options and really interesting powers already. These things that you already came with, you can also, if you so choose, alter the war gear of your unit and give them additional things. You can buy them affix shots or shells. You can, do whatever else. So you give up a lot of autonomy for a power that is not necessarily better than what you were going to do before. Now, I was going to break down some math and to try to figure out different ways, because I was really curious about if the shells and the bolters, the special bolters and the special bolt pistols, are they worse than the 6+ breaching? And the answer is, to a certain extent, yes, in certain situations. Specifically where, the special shells, they don't have the range. But other than that, it doesn't wash out that typically towards the special Inductii squad. For the lore perspective, if you want to take these squads and you want to represent something that does that, that's totally cool with me. But I think GW missed a little bit on these rules to try to represent that concept. I don't see why a 6+ breaching attack is really the thing they wanted to do. I mean, it would have been way cooler for them to, maybe give this squad instead a chance to roll on 2 psychic powers, but then they have some severe penalties for when they Perils of the Warp or something like that. Do something to really, really show the devastating nature of this bargain that Magnus made and what is happening to his sons as a result. So, I would not be surprised, and I wouldn't feel bad for any Thousand Sons player who just looks at this and says, I don't really feel like I'm gaining much by just putting a unit in that is allegedly lore appropriate, and I'm costing myself so much ability to interact with the board. That's one difference, I think, that I've seen with all the other units so far, even. The closest one has been the Blood Angels unit, which I didn't really like the rule, but I understood exactly where it fit into the fluff, and I could see it fitting really neatly in with a couple of forces and ideas. But that being said, this one for me is the first real stinker. I just don't quite understand it. All right, let's get that bad taste out of our mouth and move on to something real spicy. So I said last time that I didn't see any of these rules where, I read them and I thought to myself, okay, I'm writing a list around this. Well, then I went and sat down and I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? I feel like I could write a Sons of Horus list just around the Legion Inductii because I just like the flavor, the concept, and the rules really, really well. So let's talk about the Legion Inductii for the Sons of Horus. They are a Despoiler Squad variant. They have a really, really awesome war gear option in the fact that they can all take chain axes for 1 point per model. Dirt cheap. Suddenly, this Despoiler Squad has a Strength 5 melee weapons with Shred. Absolutely worth it. Yes, you're going to do this. Just, that's what's going to happen. Now, interestingly enough, then, we also replace Spite of the Legion with a rule that is very appropriately for the Sons of Horus called Creed of Brutality. So Creed of Brutality states that at the start of each assault phase, if a unit that includes at least one model with this special rule has any models that are within 6 inches of a friendly model with the Legionis Astartes Sons of Horus special rule that is weapon skill 5 or higher, then all of the models in the unit with this special rule gain the Rampage 1 and Furious Charge 1 special rule until the end of that phase. So this is important for a couple different things, and now is the time we're going to start talking about one of the places where I could really see this working. So weapon skill 5 units are all over the place in the Sons of Horus, so you could very likely put one of these squads in alongside one of those other elite combat units in almost any Sons of Horus list and have a reasonably good chance to expect to see this go off. But some of the units that any Sons of Horus player is probably already likely to have include things like Contemptor Dreadnoughts, Reavers, Justarin, and all of those are squads that have weapon skill 5. So putting these Inductii in tandem with those staples of your army building already means you're going to get some sort of benefit. So all is good. Now, specifically though, with the Black Reaving, there is a special rule which actually incentivizes that idea of multi-charging, in that if you have one squad of Sons of Horus charge into a unit and then a second squad of Sons of Horus charge into that same unit, that second squad is going to get Rage 2 on their attacks. And as someone who's had that played against them, that is no joke. I had Abaddon and a bunch of Justarin with Rage 2 charge into a unit of Iron Hands, and the combat was already kind of dicey, and then it got real bad after that. So Rage 2 is no joke. So obviously with Black Reaving, one of the things that I was looking at before, and I've never really considered myself someone who was likely to play Sons of Horus, but I did like to look through those things and try to figure out, well, how would I make this work? One of the things that I kept running into is the fact that you are incentivized to bring all sorts of different units because you want to have more than one unit potentially charging a lot of the units that you're going to struggle against, so you can make sure to dogpile and really do the thing right in the Sons of Horus way. Well, Reavers are silly expensive. A lot of the ways that I've seen them built, a 10-man squad with all of the bells and whistles, especially if you're running with jetpacks, is you're easily approaching 400 points for 10 models. That's a lot of points. So you don't necessarily have a lot of ways to bring... you're not going to bring like 6 squads of Reavers, at least not in large numbers. So what are you going to do? Well, for 440 points, you can bring 4 squads of Inductii. Everyone just has chain axes. And now you have 4 individual units that have at least some incentive to remain small numbers that can run alongside your other Sons of Horus units and help enable easier eat Overwatch. They can take up space and draw aggro. They can trigger that rage ability. They can support Contemptor Dreadnoughts that are going to be otherwise tar-pitted or whatever else. And they're really, really useful. The other thing, too, is that especially the Sons of Horus, there are a couple stories, like in the Siege and others, that talk about these newborn recruits and trying to get in there and prove their worth. And so this idea of these, Inductii just being around or in the presence of these legends of the Legion, and they want to work really hard to be absolutely insane so that they're also, like, taken notice of. I absolutely love the lore and the application of this rule. This is up there in my A tier. It's useful and it's fun. Honestly, like, I don't know. I felt weird putting it in the S tier because I don't think it's necessarily like the strongest thing in the world, but man, it is This unit made me consider writing... Well, honestly, no, that's not true. This unit made me write a Sons of Horus list and go over to my friend's house who plays Sons of Horus and proxy some of his stuff. Well, so he could get to play his Loyalists, because he hardly ever gets to play his Loyalists. But regardless, I love this unit also as well. Besides, if you have a friend who's a World Eater player and they think that, chain axes are exclusively their own property, show them these boys, show them what's up, share and share alike. We're all friends in the eyes of chaos. Okay, the next one up is another one that I really like. The rules are fun, but the fluff is amazing to me. That is going to land the Wordbearers right alongside the Sons of Horus in the useful and fun position with their Inductii. So let's talk rules. This is another adaptation onto the Legion Despoiler squads. It does not impact war gear. It does have a special rule modification. We are replacing Heart of the Legion with Empty Vessels and Traitor. So no Loyalist Inductii for the Wordbearers, which... Is that even a thing? Anyway, so the Empty Vessel special rule is a real fun one. At the end of each game turn, the controlling player of a unit with a special rule rolls a d6 for each such unit that does not have the corrupted unit subtype. Add 1 to the result if any enemy units were destroyed as a result of an attack or a sweeping advance made by that unit during this game turn. And add 1 to the result if the enemy warlord has been destroyed during the battle. On a 5+, that unit suffers D3 wounds with an AP value of dash and gains the corrupted unit subtype and the Furious Charge 1 special rule. Okay, so you need to roll a 5+, and you can get a +1 if you have destroyed someone in a sweeping advance, and up another +1 if the enemy warlord is already dead. So, the idea of sacrificing a mighty soul and making this possession easier to happen, that's really cool. The idea of getting the blood rolling and getting the spirits of the Empyrean rolling by butchering your opponents in a sweeping advance, also really cool. It means that in the right circumstances, this 5+ becomes a 3+. Now, I do love the fact that you suffer wounds from this happening because, demonic possession is no walk in the park, folks. And the fact that you gain corrupted, so you're going to get that fear, you're going to get that additional special rule that makes it hard for you to run away, and then the Furious Charge special rule is just so great. I was talking to my friend Dark Apostle Ben about this, and we're probably going to write a mission around this somehow. Something like, the Wordbearers and the Inductii, they're attempting to create more possessed, and so they are going to, go through this battle, and so we're trying to kill the Inductii before they can turn into demon spawn or something like that. I absolutely love this rule. It is applicable. It is something that matters and will matter in the game when you're playing. The squads themselves, they can help themselves along on the path to becoming demons by killing something in close combat, but they don't have to. You still can just roll a 5+. On top of that, I actually really like the fact that this is a Wordbearer unit that is a close combat unit, because they do have the Gal Vorback, but the Wordbearers aren't necessarily a legion that are known for their close combat potential, at least in the lore. So I think this is a fun one, to really make more beefy shock troops to spread the word of Lorgar. And this is one that's really fun. I really, really enjoy this, and I hope my friend Ben gets to painting or adapting these sometime soon. The next one up is the Salamanders Legion Inductii template, and this is also an adaptation onto the Despoiler squad. Now, it's not that exactly the Salamanders need melee supports per se, considering the fact that they've got Fire Drakes, which are one of the best melee units in the game. But still, I do like the fact that this Despoiler thing getting love. I feel like a lot of times people take the tactical squads as the easy choice because it makes sense. Despoilers have been a little bit underwhelming, I think. So anyway, I'm always glad to see in these rules. I'm glad to see these squads getting more love. So the Salamanders are going to end up on the worth considering, and I'm going to lean towards even useful and fun. I bet that almost every Salamanders player will make this unit, one of this unit, just because it's a cool idea. The fluff of it is actually really, really awesome. And honestly, maybe I've talked myself into the useful and fun. Yeah, that's it. We're doing it. We're moving them up. They're moved up on the list. Okay. So the Salamanders, now useful and fun. So So just as you're thinking about these rules, keep in mind this concept of the fact that the Salamanders in particular were really hard hit at Isfan 5, and there were not a lot of survivors. And so this Inductii template takes that into account. So the Despoiler Sergeant, as a part of this squad, has a weapon skill of 5 to try to represent that this is a veteran who is, coming back to, like a real veteran, coming back to lead this squad of newbies. And for every 10 models in the squad, you can give an upgraded sort of like relic weapon that would have come from one of those fallen heroes, a Dragon's Breath Flamer, or a Melt-A-Gun. The Dragon's Breath Flamer is 5 points, and the Melt-A-Gun is 15. For special rules, then, there is also an adjustment. Instead of Spite of the Legion, you get War Gear of Heroes. And that says that a squad with this special rule can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made with a model with that melee weapon. So earlier on in the last video, I talked about the fact that there are a number of rules for Inductii, and we haven't mentioned it yet this video, so we might as well. Among them, you cannot have non-Inductii units, which at this point in time, there are no other Inductii units other than the Inductii squad, so these squads can never be joined by anybody else as of now. The Inductii sergeants can never have artificer armor. It's just not an option for them. And this is the squad that I thought to myself, I wish this squad had the exception to that rule. I wish that the special Despoiler Sergeant that you had with weapon skill 5 was still allowed to buy artificer armor, because I think that would actually make sense to me. Now, that being said, for the other options, the rerolling 1s is quite good. It really is. And it also fits in line with a lot of the other rules that the Salamanders already have. The War Gear upgrade, the Dragon's Breath Flamer or the Melt-A-Gun, those are both fine. The Melt-A-Gun is fine. The biggest thing is I wish that it was 1 per 5, like to match other places. Now, the other thing to consider is that while you definitely can exchange these chainswords out for the Melt-A-Gun or the Dragon Breath Flamer for just 1, the biggest thing is I would maybe, if I was pinched for points, I might rather try to upgrade more of the melee options on the rest of the Despoiler squad, because our rule for rerolling 1s synergizes better with that thing. I think there's definitely opportunities for this to be better. As a matter of fact, if I play, again, Dark Apostle Ben, Dark Apostle Ben's main 2 legions, strangely, are the Wordbearers, the evilest of the evil, and then the Salamanders. So, there's a lot of ground between those. But regardless, if he ever puts this list together, I might just tell him, you know what, why don't we just say that Salamander's Inductii Sergeant has a 2+ armor save. I think that makes a more interesting story. So next to last, and definitely not one of the worst, right up there on the A tier, useful and fun, next to their Istvan survivors, the Salamanders, the Raven Guard have a really interesting rule set and adaptation to go alongside their Tactical Marines. So the Inductii rule template for the Raven Guard, there is no modification to War Gear, no modification to unit type. It's simply special rules, but it makes for a really interesting one. So Unchained Conviction is the rule that replaces Heart of the Legion. So you are losing your potential, of course, for that Feel No Pain and the Stubborn. However, what do you get out of it? Well, a unit composed entirely of models with this special rule, whose controlling player fails a pinning test made for it, is not pinned, but instead must immediately move 7 inches directly away from the enemy unit that caused the pinning test, moving each model in that unit directly away from the enemy unit by the shortest path available. If this would bring the unit into contact with the edge of the battlefield, do not move it any further. Once all the models in the unit have been moved, there are no further effects and the unit is not pinned. If the unit is required to make this move during a charge, the charge automatically fails and the unit is displaced from the position it occupied when the charge was declared. Okay, so this essentially makes you immune to pinning from shooting attacks. In addition to that, it causes you to fall back 7 inches, which most notably is the entirety of 1 movement phase. So you will lose 1 entire movement, provided you're not running or something else, to fall back in this position. Now, I was of a couple different minds of this rule when I first thought of it. So first of all, for the flavor and whatever else, I think this is really cool and pretty Raven Guard. Like that idea of redeployment, falling back when need to, getting out of that line of fire, whatever. And then most importantly, a unit that is not pinned can still act the next turn. If it needs to just march up the board again 7 inches to get back where it was and fire, whatever, it has the opportunity to do that. Now, this would be a really cool unit to include in like a otherwise elite or, assassination style list, because this is tactical squads that meet that sort of strike and fade mood or vibe that the rest of the Raven Guard is going to want to have. And also, like, really important, immune to pinning is really excellent. There are also lists that would want to try to pin a unit and then charge it to trigger, like, for example, Spite of the Legion or something else, to try to clear a squad off the board. The fact that you could be pinned and not held in place, it prevents this unit from being used as like a charge leaping pad, as like a charge springboard to try to move from one part of the board into one combat and then try to position yourself for a nice charge to something else later on in the game. The one thing that is, maybe sort of questionable or maybe I don't like a lot is the fact that if you have a reliable way of pinning a unit and this unit is sitting on an objective that scores, like, let's say at the start of a turn or something like that, or an end of a turn, then you really can sort of prevent that unit from being in scoring position to some certain extent. Now, that is less likely, I think, to come up than just general, like, falling back or pinning situations. But the unit is definitely usable. It's flavorful, and it works really well with a lot of different things. Last, and like 100% definitely not least, is the S tier unit here, the must-have. This is so great. The Alpha Legion come out swinging with a super fluffy and a super fun unit that is definitely going to see play with your Alpha Legion players. It's just so much fun. So this is an adjustment to the tactical squad. There are no modifications to war gear or anything. It's simply a rule swap. And you get rid of Heart of the Legion and trade it for Treacherous Lure. And the Treacherous Lure special rule says, a unit made up entirely of models with this special rule may not be selected as the target of a shooting attack in any phase of the first game turn of the battle. However, the unit may be the target of a shooting attack made as part of an Interceptor advanced reaction, and it may suffer hits and wounds from attacks that scatter onto it or are otherwise allocated to it due to the effects of another special rule. So, like, you can't put this squad into like a deep strike assault or a flanking assault and get away with avoiding being shot at. But if you're otherwise deploying this squad normally, then you can have one turn of flat out movement and positioning where you can get yourself exactly where you want to be on the board to claim an objective or whatever else, and you can feel pretty confident that you will be immune to manipulation by your opponent. Now, importantly here, it does not say that they can't be charged. So, I mean, like, a close combat unit this isn't going to matter much to them necessarily. But if you think about it, let's say you're playing a mission in which you are placing objectives. You can choose to place objectives on the wings of the board, and then if you got one or two of these units, you can very comfortably move these scoring units into position on those objectives, begin scoring immediately, and know that your opponent is going to have to physically move across the board to get close to you if they are really, really afraid of the points that you're going to score in that first turn. It feels super right for Alpha Legion. It feels super fun, and there's definitely a lot of cool possibilities here. This is totally a unit that I would paint in other Legions colors for the Alpha Legion and make that part of the treacherous lure, the concept or whatever else, is make them actually look like an Alpha Legion unit that is pretending to be something else. I think that would be super fun, super fluffy. There are a lot of crunch possibilities with this Inductii template, but there are also a lot of fantastic, just fluffy ideas, and it feels really right for the Alpha Legion to have something so silly, so effective, and so mind-gamey. So there we have it. That's all 18, and I have to say that overall I'm pretty impressed with these rules. There are almost none of them that I think are really like game-defining rules, but there are lots of really great lore ideas and very Legion-appropriate fluff choices made in here that are really going to enhance your ability to play the game and make your army feel even more character appropriate. I'm just going to go back through the whole list now and give a 2-second spiel on each of them and explain again what I think I would use these for, how you might get something out of them. So the Volkite Specialist Dark Angels, you are going to lose the Hexagrammaton rule, but the ability to have that cheaper access to a little bit of different firepower, it's definitely a cool sideboard idea and something that it really works with the whole, the Dark Angels are the one that have all of the special toys and whatever else for being the first Legion. I absolutely like it. It won't fit into all of your lists, but it will be an option that fits into a lot of them. The Emperor's Children Specialist Duelists that have the special ability to avoid or sort of limit pinning and leadership tests as they're running across the board. Again, one of the common themes we'll see for the ones that we like out of these lists, taking the spoiler squads, which don't really have the same kind of impact in the game for most legions that we'd want them to, making them a little bit better, making it feel fluffy, making it feel cool. A bunch of dudes with turnable sabers, specialists, duelists running across the board. I would absolutely expect all of my Emperor's Children player friends to build a list of these, or build a unit of these. They're so cool. The White Scars Inductii, they're totally not the Sagyarmazan as represented in the novels. Hint, hint, they are. This one is one of my personal top 2s. And I mean, I love the lore. It totally fits within the story. And on top of that, it changes a unit that is not that impressive, typically for White Scars, and gives them a battlefield role that is interesting, fluffy, and gives them something to do. They also have ways to synergize pretty darn well with the 2 Rites of War that the White Scars get access to as a Legion. So it's kind of a no-brainer here. Powerful rules, really fluffy concepts, and easy to fit into a lot of different lists. Fantastic rules writing. Great example of crunch meeting fluff in a fantastic union. The Alpha Legion, as we just talked about, this sort of lure and the ability to take one of these squads and put yourself into position to score or do something else in later turns. It's very, very in character. It's something that the Alpha Legion specifically do several times in the lore, so it totally makes sense. And I absolutely love it. And a fantastic example of a way to do some fun modeling stuff, like model this up as another unit. Do one of those, I mean, it doesn't have to be the all-out, people doing the half Alpha Legion, half some other heraldry models, but you can do something to make them look obscured, and it would look really awesome, feel really awesome, be super lore appropriate, and open up a lot of tactical options for you in your army. Next here down in the useful and fun, we've got the Space Wolves, and, again, it seems to be a common thread. If the unit is allowed to take chain axes, it ends up making it better, but this is another Despoiler Squad variant that allows you to put together a unit that can move really quickly across the board. It feels very fluffy for the way the Space Wolves work in the lore and otherwise. It's reminiscent of old rule sets, and it's fun. It's not required, it's definitely not game breaking, and there is trade-off that makes you think about using its special rules, but it's awesome and it's a lot of fun. Next up is the Night Lords, and as we said, not as powerful as maybe I thought in the last video, unless there is an FAQ, which I would not expect at all. But regardless, super fluffy. And that idea of the murderers and the killers, Aaron Dembski-Bowden's vision of the Night Lords come to life here on the board. It's absolutely fantastic, and definitely a unit that I'm going to make, regardless of how their rules end up turning out. Ultramarines, similarly great, totally fits the lore. It's the establishment of the Codex Astartes. I mean, it's such a meme in all of Space Marine lore. It's so cool to see something like that have a representation in the game. And on top of that, it's super effective as well. Having the ability to put a smaller squad in there to be a special utility option. It's a can opener to destroy some tanks. It's an opportunity to try to take out a few high-powered infantry, draw aggro away from other forces or whatever. It's tactical. It's efficient. It's very Ultramarines. Useful and fun. The Sons of Horus, the only one on this list that I like so much that I would actually consider making an army around it. These Inductii with all of the benefits that they can get and the way they slot so nicely into the Black Reaving Rite of War. They would still be useful and see play in other Rites of War as well, but this one specifically just feels right and perfect, and it's a great way to take an army that, my favorite about it really is that the Black Reaving feels like an elite force, right, of war, but you can add this horde element onto that and really change the dimensions of what you're doing, adding a lot of variety to a list, which is just, it's cool and fun. Wordbearers, as I said, another one that is on the top for my fluffiness. The fact that the rule interacts with the board, but it isn't required to trigger in a very specific way, meaning you'll never see it happen. It feels right for the Wordbearers. And I love seeing more demon stuff creep into the standard Wordbearer list, because I feel like there should be more of that. We're supposed to get the demons list this summer soon, but, you know, I'm not going to say I'm not holding my breath, because I really want to see these rules, but, like, for the time being, Wordbearers players, you've dedicated yourself to the motif. Take advantage of this, put one of these together, and have fun with it. The Salamanders, similarly, that idea of sacrifice and loss, reflected in that veteran leader taking over a squad of newbies, taking them under their wing. It's a very, very fluffy thing, and I really do enjoy it. It also adds a little bit of subtle melee focus in an army list that, outside of the Fire Drakes, maybe doesn't have a ton of that necessarily. At least it's not baked into the rules like with some other legions. So I really like that for the variety, again, that it offers. Definitely some cool modeling opportunities. I would paint up every one of these sergeants as if it was a character with that level of detail or whatever. It just seems like the cool thing to do. Every one of these sergeants can have a really awesome story about how they survived Istvan, or how they made it through the era of the Shattered Legions, or they broke through to Beta Garmin and barely made it out there as well. I mean, whatever. It's a great story. The Raven Guard one is, and I'm not too familiar with the Raven Guard lore, so I'm not exactly sure how appropriate it is regarding that. However, it does feel right for a lot of lists that you want to play with that hit and fade. The ability to avoid being pinned is really excellent on a troop that is basically probably just going to be used to hold objectives, hold territory, and cause distractions. It's really great for that concept, and it does fit with what I understand, at least, of the style of the Raven Guard. Next, down in the B tier, we still have several great choices. We've got the Iron Warriors. While they gain the ability to be immune to pinning, just blank and stop whatever, they do unfortunately have to fire at whatever's the closest thing, so it does give your opponent, unfortunately, a little bit more autonomy over their use than you might be like to do. However, a smart player will have ways to mitigate this, of course. Still a cool list. It brings in some of that flavor of that just totally ignoring incoming fire, which was one of my favorite parts about playing the Iron Warriors from last edition. So definitely something that I still appreciate, something that I still like. Imperial Fists, I probably rated this too high. The ability to swap out one guy for a heavy weapon is kind of neat. At least it'll give you a chance to shoot something when the tactical squad is far, far away, standing in a line on a wall or something. But the rule that you gain for the chance to do one pinning attack is just not that efficient, I don't think. I like the concept of it, being able to support this, but it's kind of like the Ultramarines light version, as it's just less tactically sound. But still, I mean, you're going to have those models, the extra autocannons or the extra heavy bolters standing around anyway. I could definitely see you fielding one of these things, and honestly, you don't need to do much to convert it up or whatever, because you're just swapping out one model. It's okay. The Iron Hands is a big risk, big reward. You have the ability to gain weapon skill and toughness, but you also have the ability to do nothing or take wounds. So sometimes you get something, sometimes you don't. The one thing that's interesting is that because the sergeant in this squad can take a Phosphex bomb, it synergizes pretty nicely with Rite of War, like the Head of the Gorgon, where you could take that squad and outflank them, have them jump out of the Rhino, toss a Phosphex bomb, and then, you know, maybe they get that extra bonus and they're just slightly more tough to remove on the backboard. Maybe they don't, but there's still a distraction with a little bit more bite behind it because of those specific rules. Also, as I mentioned in the last video, there are awesome models that you could totally and should totally use to represent this. So, I mean, it's a no-go. I'm going to build them for sure. The next up, we have the World Eaters. Ravening Madman is not it's not super strong. It's very, very, very fluffy, and it makes a lot of sense. And there's definitely some places that it would be super applicable and useful, especially when you have to charge your standard despoilers into something with weapon skill 5. It's only going to make them more survivable in situations where they were going to be hit on 3s anyway. Like I said, especially if you are going late Heresy, Siege of Terra, having 2 squads of these I think makes a lot of sense because it totally fits the narrative. And I do like when you see something where, it shows up in the lore, it's the image we've imagined. Here is an exact way to represent that in the rules. The last one of the B tier is the Death Guard. Certainly not the least of the B tier. We have squads that we definitely want to keep small because of the synergy to the Feel No Pain sort of rule that we've got. The big problem with this rule is that we determine if it comes into effect at the start of the phase. So if you start with a full 10 models and you get wiped out, the rule does absolutely nothing for you. It's much better if this squad takes little chip damage here and there, and then you really see it shine. You can take 2 all-chem flamers, which are cool little flamers and a nice little bit of anti-infantry option, which means, if you take these and put them into a rhino or something, run them along the side and try to take out a recon squad, or something that would have been infiltrating, something that's not part of the main force, I could definitely see it working. And also it's a pretty cheap unit, so if you have spare points, definitely worth looking at. The Blood Angels end up alone in the C tier. I can't tell. Does this mean that I'm bad at separating things at the top, or does it mean that I'm very positive? But whatever. I do love the lore of this, as it really seems to represent that concept of the Revenant Legions, the Blood Angels being sort of monstrosities. The way the rules apply and work, though, it seems like a missed opportunity, as it doesn't necessarily give them a lot. It triggers with difficulty, and you have to sacrifice a lot to get to it. There's a little bit of anti-synergy in there as well, but it's still cool. And I definitely think, especially if you're playing, a certain element of Terran Blood Angels from before, I would definitely see myself using this. And then finally, I hate to end negatively, but man, the Thousand Suns one, I don't like it, and I feel like you give up a lot. And again, I feel like it's a misfire on rules that don't necessarily give us what we think we want to see from the fluff standpoint. You sacrifice a lot. There are other ways they could have made them more wildly powerful with more dramatic drawback. I'm sure that there are Thousand Suns players that would have been just fine with a unit that had impressive psychic powers, but also had like a 1 in 3 chance to blow themselves up with those psychic powers. I mean, how cool and how fun and how fluffy would that have been? But regardless, it's just not an option that I could see Thousand Suns players taking unless they have a very specific niche, and this is the way that they can choose to represent it. I'm not going to be, I would never be down on anyone who looks at this rule and says, I'm not sure if I want to take that handicap. All right, well, that wraps it up, and I will be working towards doing some more Siege of Cthonia content here soon. I definitely want to talk about the tank upgrades, and I want to talk about the Warlord traits that the Imperial Fists and the Sons of Horus get. I like what they did with that, and if this ends up being the model going forwards for rule books, I would be totally okay with that. What else would you like to hear from me about? We got a huge boost. At the time of the recording for this second half, the first half of the video was by far the most successful thing I put up on YouTube. And so it netted a lot of new listeners, which I'm very grateful for. But with those new listeners comes an opportunity. I want to know, what do you all want to hear? Please drop a message here in the comments or send me an email at ineptusastartes30k@gmail.com. Again, thanks for everything. Really appreciate it. If you're new here, please like and subscribe, share this video, and hope to talk to you very soon. Thanks so much.